All righty. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. We're going to give it a few more seconds while people roll in, but as we wait, feel free to introduce yourself in the chat. Let us know where you're joining us from, whether you're a CFP volunteer, a nonprofit professional. Let us know what organization you're with. Just let us know who you are. Okay, we have a few more people rolling in. So let's just get started. Welcome. My name is Jordan Tobias, and I'm the manager of grants and programs here at the Foundation for Financial Planning. We're also joined by Rachel Roth, who is our senior director of grants and programs, and she will speak towards the end of our webinar. But together, we are thankful, or we thank you for joining us here today for our webinar on empathy-driven financial planning with Sasha Grabenstetter and Emily Koochel. As many of you know, pro bono is not just about offering financial expertise, it's about connecting with clients in a way that empowers and uplifts them. Today, Sasha and Emily will explore how empathy can improve client outcomes, enhance your pro bono practice, and even strengthen your skills as a financial planner. But before I introduce our speakers formally and we get into our presentation, I do want to spend a few minutes talking about FFP and why we do what we do. And the answer is pretty simple. We know that millions of Americans need but can't access quality and ethical financial advice. So for 30 years, our goal has been to help communities in need by creating better access to quality financial advice and guidance. And we do this in three major ways. First, we develop and support pro bono financial planning programs in partnerships with nonprofits across the country. So we provide grant funding, CFP professionals, technical assistance, and other resources to ensure that these programs thrive. We also recruit and train financial advisors to do this pro bono service, and we connect them directly to through our volunteer platform called ProBonoPlannerMatch.org. And third, we lead the movement to foster pro bono service within the profession via our original research, industry partnerships, and public awareness activities. And we also offer a number of resources to support CFP to provide this service. First, we have a pro bono financial planning volunteer training, which is a free 1-hour module that helps advisors understand the basics of how to provide pro bono service to underserved members in our community. The training is approved for 1 hour of CE credit by the CFP board. We also offer worksheets, webinars like this one, user-friendly disclosure forms for your pro bono engagements. And I also want to note that this webinar today is eligible for AFCPE and CFP boards continuing education credit. So if you're a CFP, we will submit your credit to the board after this webinar. And if you are an AFC, Rachel will provide the code towards the end of the webinar. But going back to the points, we also have ProBonoPlannerMatch.org, which again is our platform that connects the CFP volunteers with the nonprofits with pro bono financial planning volunteer opportunities. And then lastly, we offer E&O liability insurance to advisors who connect with a nonprofit through our site, Pro Bono Planner Match, or if they volunteer with any of our nonprofit grantees. So I encourage every CFP that is here with us today to join the pro bono movement by getting involved however you can, whether that's registering a pro bono planner match and volunteering, signing up to receive our latest news through our newsletter, or just supporting our mission with a gift. Your work matters to millions of Americans in need, and we truly just wouldn't be able to do this work without you. So please connect with Rachel Roth or some of my other colleagues here listed on the screen. But we're thrilled to have two incredible experts from eMoney with us today. First, we have Sasha Grabenstetter, and she's a senior financial planning consultant at eMoney. Sasha brings deep expertise in financial counseling and behavioral finance, helping advisors understand how emotions impact financial decisions and how to engage clients with empathy and care. And joining Sasha, we have Dr. Emily Koochel, and she is the manager of financial wellness at eMoney. Emily is a seasoned researcher and educator, specializing in financial therapy and behavioral science. Her work focuses on bridging the gap between financial planning and emotional well-being to create more meaningful client interactions. So together they will share their insights and strategies on how financial planners can use empathy to build trust, enhance client relationships, and ultimately improve financial outcomes for the communities that they serve. So without further ado, I welcome Sasha and Emily for being here. And thank you. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Jordan. Thank you, Rachel. Thank you, Foundation, for having us. Emily, if you don't mind, I'm going to get us started. So, oh, it's like, okay. I was panicking for a second there, Jordan. I was like, I can't see
You got
anything.
it. You got it.
Okay, great. So, good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are located in the United States. Maybe you're not even in the United States, maybe you're outside, but welcome to today's webinar powered by the Foundation for Financial Planning, Empathic Engagement, Enhancing Your Pro Bono Financial Planning Practice. Lots of E's. We like alliteration here. Um, I was like, I'll get us introduced and then I'll let Emily take over. So again, my name is Sasha Grabenstetter. As you heard, I'm a senior financial planning education consultant with eMoney. I'm also an AFC and on the board of directors for AFCPE as well. I'll turn it over to Dr. Kushel to introduce yourself and kick us off.
Great. Thank you for the foundation. Thank you to Sasha. As mentioned, my name is Dr. Emily Koochel. I manage our financial wellness team at eMoney. This is tucked away inside our financial planning group inside of eMoney, which holds experts such as CFPs, AFCs, such as Sasha, amongst others. And this is where we have the opportunity to educate and do research around all things financial wellness. And we're going to share a little bit of that with you today. Before we get started, we have some housekeeping. As always, with these types of webinars, it is educational and not advice. So we do ask that you please consult the appropriate resources. We have a quick agenda here for you to get just a guide, understanding the empathetic approach, enhancing cultural humility. We'll then go to the referral process and committing to continuous learning. With that, I want to set the stage because we're going to be talking about empathy. And I want to start us off with just a quick story or scenario of sorts. So imagine this. We have a single mother sitting across from you, clutching a folder of overdue bills, her eyes welling up as she explains to you that she's juggling multiple jobs. She is also raising her children, and she's constantly fighting the fear of what tomorrow might bring. Now, in this moment, I ask myself and I ask you, what is your initial instinct? For many, the initial instinct, that response, is to use the skills and education that we have. It's to pull out calculators, perhaps spreadsheets, start talking about strategies about how we can offer some relief to the single mother. But what if in that moment, rather than jumping to a solution, that what she really needs is to be seen, to be heard, to feel understood. And through this, we can actually move forward, meeting her exactly where she is, of course, without judgment. See, the truth is that for many of us, we weren't specifically trained in taking an empathetic approach into our practices and the services that we provide. And there's a whole host of reasons, but one of which is that we can feel really intimidated. There's a fear of messing up. There's a fear of not saying the right thing, or there's a fear of simply not knowing how to connect emotionally or on this deeper level. So when working with pro bono clients, this can be especially important because many of whom may be navigating circumstances of financial instability, systemic inequalities, or emotional trauma that's tied to money. And in these cases, empathy is not just a nice to have, it is essential. Empathy allows us to meet our clients exactly where they are. It's acknowledging their struggles, it's validating their emotions, and it's showing them that their story really matters. It helps us to serve without judgment, and it creates a space where clients feel safe, where they can be vulnerable. And this is often where we really start to see real progress that becomes possible in this scenario when we meet people with empathy. So today we're going to explore how embracing empathy is not only powerful, it is a transformative skill, and how it can help you to better serve your clients, meet them where they are, and ultimately help change their lives, going beyond that of just the numbers. With that, I want to start with setting the stage here with two words that feel very similar and sometimes are used in place of one another, which is not quite accurate. So I want to take some time with the difference between empathy and sympathy. Sympathy is kind of that intellectual ability that I can objectively understand that perhaps the mother in this scenario is certainly going through a hard time, that it is challenging, that perhaps that does feel a bit overwhelming. I can objectively understand that. That's tough. And especially if I'm looking at the financial situation, I can objectively understand that this is challenging. However, sympathy is going to take this, or sorry, empathy is going to take this further. Empathy is that emotional reaction. It's stepping into somebody else's shoes. It is visceral. It's that experience of actually stopping that internal dialogue that all of us have going on. And it is truly focusing on that person, their situation, and looking to better understand them, to feel it with them. The difference here is that empathy builds stronger, more trusting relationships, and it really helps to foster understanding and connection. So the difference here is that sympathy can feel a bit passive or even a bit detached, and empathy is taking it a step further. So now with just a quick stage setting here between the difference, I'm going to send it over to Sasha, and she's going to do a real deep dive on all things empathy.
So now that we kind of have a good baseline between empathy and sympathy, thank you for that, Emily, of course. Let's get a little deeper into what empathy is. So now this definition comes from a nursing scholar, and her name is Teresa Wiseman. And she actually conducted a concept analysis, which basically means that she thoroughly examined and clarified empathy, like what it actually means. And this is one of my favorite definitions. There are tons of other definitions. This is just my favorite. So, but she broke this also down into different attributes of empathy, and she defined it in these 4 parts. So we have seeing the world as others see it. So without being able to see the world as others see it, empathy cannot occur. So I know I struggle with this with my youngest son, who really sometimes wants to stay up late and watch just one more show and snuggle when I want him to go to bed. So I'm trying to be a little bit more kind and caring and seeing the world as he sees it. It's a safe space, wants to snuggle before going to bed. Of course, understanding another's current feelings, just knowing the perception of what someone else is feeling. Of course, everyone experiences emotions in their own special way. So each person you have to be connected with them, and don't hesitate to ask questions if you're unsure about how they're feeling. Make sure you ask. Of course, being non-judgmental, so being more objective, being a little bit more understanding with your clients is important, as you all probably know. Remembering to focus on the actions rather than labeling the person, and take a moment to think about what you truly know about them before making any judgments, which we'll talk more about here in just a little bit. And of course, being able to communicate your understanding. So being able to communicate with the person you're empathizing with. Really, this understanding really clicks when with the words we say, our body language, and the situation all comes together to show that we truly get each other and feel connected. Wiseman goes on to say that empathy is a skill which is crucial to the helping relationship. And as we all know, in our financial profession, more specifically financial planning and financial counseling, most advisors and counselors get into this field because they want to help more people. I hear this over and over again from new and upcoming and career changers, as well as those who have been in business for a long time as well. So as we continue deeper into empathy, did you know that there are different facets of empathy? So one facet of empathy that we have is called emotional empathy. So this definition is the ability to feel what someone else feels. So maybe you're an advisor, financial professional, who when you see a client crying, you cry too. The same could be said for any other emotion. Maybe they get angry, you get angry. When they show appreciation and gratitude, you show appreciation and gratitude. Or if they're being anxious and confused, you maybe are anxious and confused as well. That emotional empathy can lead us kind of wiped out, especially when we're going on a different on the roller coaster of emotions. Another facet of empathy is cognitive empathy, and this refers to being able to intellectually understand the level and significance of someone else's emotional experience, but you're not actually experiencing it for yourself. So you might know what it feels like and you can tap into that emotion, but you're not emotionally going there. Another famous researcher, Brene Brown, says that cognitive empathy, or perspective taking, as she calls it, is the ability to reach back into our own experience and create connection. So, for example, you might know what it's like to lose a pet. And you know what that experience feels like, and you can connect with that client on that experience cognitively, but you don't have to feel those emotions. And that's what we call cognitive empathy. From an article written by Dr. Meglertz, she described cognitive empathy as the ability to hear the signals that clients need versus having the same emotional reaction as the client. Because if day in and day out we're utilizing our emotional empathy, especially with our clients, we're going to develop burnout and quickly. And that can actually happen more often probably with pro bono clients. They might be going through chemo or cancer diagnoses. They might be a military veteran. These are all these things that we need to be mindful of. Researcher Brene Brown also says that empathy is a tool of compassions, and we can respond empathically only if we are willing to be present to someone else's pain. So when was the last time you practiced empathy with your clients? And did you see an improvement with your rapport and relationship skill building when you did? So one thing I want to talk about is some research. That's what I do is I consume research and then I spit it back out. And I really like this study and want to talk about it. So research on empathy, as you might imagine, is pretty vast. But this one study in particular I want to focus on today was done by researchers Rattan, McDonald, and Norgen. And this research looked at if you're empathetic, if you've previously gone through the experience yourself, like, are you empathetic if you've gone through it yourself? We always hear that phrase of walking in someone else's shoes when it comes to empathy, but does that phrase ring true? So another way to answer this question or ask this question is, are you empathetic if you've previously gone through that exact same experience? One thing to note as we go through this kind of research study is each study had two groups, one group who has experienced the event and one who has not. So just keep that in mind as we go through. So the first experiment that these researchers went through was done about a polar plunge. Now, I'm aware that lots of folks nowadays may have cold plunged, which is a very similar concept. Typically, cold plunging is done by yourself, usually in like a one kind of person bucket. That's the best way to describe bucket, yeah. But this cold plunging is more focused around like typically a charity event or community involvement. That's usually happening when we're doing these kind of things. So in this study, participants were polar plunging into a very cold, icy Lake Michigan in March. So the research participants were placed into two groups. They had either just plunged or they were going to plunge 1 week later. So imagine that you are reading a story about Pat who wanted to complete the polar plunge, but at the last minute, they chickened out. For whatever reason, they just decided not to do the plunge. So what do you all think? Are you empathetic to Pat? Let's find out. So the results are actually really fascinating. It seemed like those who had already taken the polar plunge were actually a little less friendly and they were more dismissive towards Pat than those who were still gearing up to go into the polar plunge for the next week. Now, I'm in the camp of I've never polar plunged, so I would probably chicken out too. But if you have done it before, did you find yourself also being indifferent to Pat? Or maybe you've cold plunged as well. So another study they wanted to do to kind of, again, understand empathy a little bit more was, again, the study participants. There were two groups. There were two camps. There was who have experienced unemployment and those who were currently employed or have never actually been unemployed. If you're in that camp, I give more power to you, but I've been on the unemployment side. It's no fun. But once again, the study participants, they read a story about a man who was really struggling to find work. when ultimately he ended up turning to selling to illegal narcotics out of desperation. So what we found from this part of the experiment was that those participants who had overcome employment were less compassionate and more judgmental than the other group, those who were currently employed or never unemployed. So just some really interesting things to think about, and I promise I'll wrap it up in just a few slides here. So this is a different piece, like probably most of us have been studied or been bullied, I'm so sorry. But participants in this piece of this read about a teen who was experiencing bullying. Like I said, we probably all have been bullied at some point in our lives, so it's maybe a common feeling, but in this version, the teen who had been bullied either coped successfully or they responded with violence. Now, again, like we said, we've all probably been bullied in our lives. And if you're able to, I kind of want you to tap into that feeling. But if it is too painful of an experience, you may not want to. But if you can, try. I know that I've been bullied for many things in my life. But what does the bullying you experience feel like? What does that feel like in the body right now? I'm sure it doesn't bring up pleasant emotions or memories. So what's actually really fascinating is that the participants who were more compassionate toward the teen who cope with the bullying than the one who lashed out. So after these 3 studies by these researchers, what have we learned? We've learned it's harder to empathize when you've been there. And unfortunately, the answer is yes to this. We do find it harder to empathize when we've had to face a similar ordeal or hardship. The question is, why does this happen? So the study found 2 things. The study found that we often forget how difficult our own experience was, and we tend to judge others who struggle with similar challenges. Think of it as if I could do it, they could do it too. Or if I could find a job, why can't they? I know that as a young financial counselor, that was something I really struggled with was, hey, if I can budget, you can budget too. Like, it's no big deal. It's something that I had to really work hard to learn not to judge and obviously push through. Secondly, people who have overcome tough experiences, they're confident that they understand how difficult it is because they overcame it too. So I think we can all agree that each human experience is unique, and my emotional bandwidth is different from Emily's emotional bandwidth, and it's also different from yours. So think of this as, again, you're in debt. I paid off my debts. It was so easy. So how do we change this? How do we begin to empathize without judgment when you've experienced a similar situation? So for some of us, we tend to avoid empathy at all costs. That just happens, and we also get overloaded by how much empathy we have to give out in the day. So one way to be more empathetic is to kind of change how you perceive the mental effort required for empathy. Another study that was done on empathy showed that participants were less likely to avoid empathy, and they felt fewer negative impacts like that mental effort and discomfort. This suggests when people tend to avoid empathy, it's because they think that it's mentally tiring or unpleasant. So if we boost our confidence in our skills in being empathetic, these feelings of effort and aversion are reduced, leading to less empathy avoidance. So our goal is to help individuals feel more capable by boosting your confidence. Now that you're aware of the judgment that may come from when you've experienced a situation or hardship, you'll be more aware of it going forward. We'll talk about this in just a second, but just some ways to be aware and practice your own empathy. Being aware of your own biases and values. Woo, today, of course, don't try to fix people. Talking to new people, new experiences. We'll talk about this more in a second, but work with someone on a shared mission or cause. These are some experiences that if you would like to broaden your experience with empathy, that may be something that you would like to look at. So, of course, we have professionally and personally. Things like, just traveling to new places. I know we're many years post-COVID, so hopefully you're able to go and travel to new places and experience new things. Of course, volunteering with a local organization or organization in general, maybe like the foundation. But working with groups of people that are maybe experiencing homelessness, who are refugees, or individuals with disabilities brings personal exposure to different walks of life and gives us a better understanding and more compassion. Of course, joining a support group. So being a part of a support group, whether that's for grief, addiction, recovery, or even other life changes, often offers a raw perspective on shared human struggling. I know, for example, one time I went to an AA group and just had a conversation with those individuals who were going through, their steps. And here it really changed my mindset on a lot of addiction pieces. Of course, reading memoirs and personal narratives, things like books and essays and stories that can provide a real account of other people's experiences. Of course, listening to diverse podcasts or TED Talks, some of my favorite things. Many podcasts and TED Talks features speakers with unique life stories or challenging experiences, and this can really broaden your experiences by listening to unheard perspectives. And then lastly, on the personal side is just leaning into difficult conversation, which is of course a subject that can be a little touchy. So, but leaning in those conversations with your clients about their loss, any personal challenges or fears, you can create a safe space for vulnerability. On the professional side, and I'll kind of zoom through these and then hand it back over to Emily, is just job shadowing in different roles if that's something that you'd like to do. Of course, working with cross-functional teams, when you get to work with a team that's from a different department or a different part of your company, that can really help give us unique contributions for those individuals. Of course, inclusive leadership training. Emily's gone through lots of these recently, but the professional training that focuses on inclusivity, diversity, and equity, of course, can provide tools for leaders. We're looking at also professional mentoring programs that pair like newer employees with experienced colleagues to foster more empathy through understanding the challenges that they bring to their career. And lastly, this is coming up, but conflict management training, learning conflict resolution skills, especially the role playing or case studies, this can be really helpful, especially when we're looking at to look at different viewpoints that are conflicting and then help just go through those disputes constructively. So speaking of some of these professional ways to broaden your experience with empathy, let me turn it back over to Emily and she can talk about empathy from another lens.
Great. Thanks, Sasha. One of the lenses that I want to
I think Emily might be having Zoom issues.
Oh no! We knew this might happen. Zoom has been our enemy for the last few days. So I was like, Emily actually really helped write this kind of piece of it. I was like, let me just text her real quick and see if we can get her back. We lost you. Sorry, everyone.
Yeah, it looks like she's going to join again.
Okay. I was like, please have empathy for Emily today, guys.
Okay, my internet dropped there, but I am back. Okay, hopefully we can sustain all things. Thanks for hanging with me. Thank you. I agree. Thanks for the empathy, folks. So all of this to be said that we have our own informed lens. Another lens that we hold is going to be our own social and cultural lens. And I love this from Sandra Davis. This actually comes from the CFP board's Psychology of Financial Planning. And I'm going to read this quote because I think it's so well done. It can be easy to assume that this is only relevant when we're working with a client who doesn't share our own cultural identity, our own experiences. But the truth is that we may have to be even more attentive to avoid making assumptions about those who we think are just like us. So this really reflects nicely with the experiments that Sasha was talking about, that those who may have experienced something very similar, what we do, and we're kind of hardwired to do this, if we see something that's similar, our brain likes to take a shortcut and say, I recognize that behavior, I recognize that pattern. And so we have to be really intentional with ourselves to make sure that we, again, settle that internal dialogue and that we actually look to be present to notice maybe some of the differences of that person's experience. With that, I want to press on to the next slide here, which is going to talk about that humility is really key. No one is expecting you to have a complete understanding of anybody else's experience, whether that's culturally related or otherwise. And bear in mind to give yourself some grace as you're going through these conversations, especially if it's new for you and you're still kind of finding your footing or your comfort. Bear in mind that you probably will make a mistake. We all make mistakes, but what we learn from this is how we continually evaluate our own experiences, how we can continue to build our empathy through some of the ways that Sasha had mentioned. We'll talk about a couple more coming up, and always remaining open to learn from others and to continue to educate yourself. This is a process of demonstrating your own awareness and your own willingness to continue to learn. All right, I think we're back over to you, Sasha.
Thank you, Emily. Pop back on the screen. So one thing that we wanted to talk about before we talked into the next piece of this is really just that clients will go through life transitions. Talking about culture humility, we're looking at life transitions. So whether these transitions are like negative or positive experience, all of your clients will have transitions and that event will impact them. So one of the best things you can do as an advisor, as a pro bono volunteer, as a counselor, as a professional in general, are a few things. And so you definitely want to help them through that transition, and they want to know that you care. So these are some things that we think that really are helpful when we're talking about these changes that are happening with our clients, because they're going to happen. So of course, to start us off, normalize it. Some life transitions are common. Of course, use your common sense when you're in judgment here. There's going to be exceptions to this rule. You know your clients best, and not every life transition can be normalized. So just remember, dealing with grief or a really hard social readjustment can be complex, and it often takes a long time to process everything. The next thing I think that's important is when helping clients is just to document it, and small gestures mean a lot. I know sometimes it's just those little things that are important to us, but when we're talking about building that client planner, client counselor relationship, it's important to make note of that event, and whether it's your CRM, your financial planning software, or wherever it makes most sense for you to remember, document it. Make sure that you talk about it, ask about it next time you see them. If you're following up from grief, ask them how they're feeling, those kind of things. The next thing, of course, is remember it while we're at it. Make a task to call that client and check in. If it's the birth of a child or the death of a loved one, following up on job loss, or even seeing how their health has improved can mean a lot to a client. It doesn't have to be a lot, but it could even just be an email preferred, but make it count. Another thing that I think is really cool is that actually research from Jamieson et al. Shows that when we're going through social readjustments, we usually use social media to let others know about it. So for a more positive social readjustment, things like getting married, having children, we post publicly. We want other people to know, celebrate with us through the internet. For more negative social readjustment, we may use forums like Reddit or Discord or whatever makes you feel comfortable, these Facebook groups, to have conversations or even share private messages to let other people know what we're dealing with. And lastly, don't be afraid to refer out if you're feeling that your client's dealing with some really heavy stuff. But I'm going to let Emily cover that though. So Emily, I'll send it right back over to you.
Great. Thanks, Sasha. So we'll go ahead and press on to the next slide. As we have these emotive conversations and take a more empathetic approach, we may inevitably find ourselves in a conversation that we are not trained to be in. And it's really important to remember that we are certainly not mental health professionals unless you have a designation or education that allows you to practice in that way. But inside of financial planning, we're certainly not qualified to address these behaviors or do any type of diagnoses for anybody. So it's really important to make sure that we certainly have a network of referrals. And I'm going to get into that referral process here just because there are often questions about how do I go about making that referral. So this comes from Texas Online, and I believe it was developed by Dr. Megan Lertz, and she is exceptional. So follow her if you're not. But she has put together this wonderful mental health referral spectrum to really be helpful for all of us. So on the far left-hand side, as it shows in the green, anything that is of pure financial planning services, common problems, low emotional stress, et cetera. This is often still staying in the court that many of us are trained in as financial planners, financial counselors, et cetera. Now, we may see some of this start to move over into what is that yellow zone, which is maybe there's more emotion, there's more emotive conversations, there is higher levels of experience of financial stress or financial anxiety. We're starting to tip into perhaps we need to start considering some referrals. One kind of note here is if this becomes disruptive to the planning process or the services that you're providing to that client, and you are at a halt, you're no longer able to make progress, they are resistant over a period of time, this is often where we take pause and decide perhaps we need to pull in another financial professional or another professional in general who would be helpful in better serving and understanding maybe some of the challenges that are underlying for us to make progress in the financial services that we're providing. And then certainly as you progress over to the right-hand side or the red side, we see that there is always kind of an element of perhaps a mental health challenge that continues to be recurrent. And this you find yourself having maybe tripping into what seems to be more therapeutic type conversations. This is certainly where we can no longer serve the client. And we want to make sure that they have the best professional fit. Interestingly, so I believe it's Dr. Clance who talks about this in facilitating financial health. When people are looking or seeking to have conversations about money, we often go to financial professionals. We go to a financial counselor, financial advisor, a financial planner, et cetera. It's the default, and it's what we know generally kind of socially is available to us. As those financial professionals, it's important that we also act as a guide to understand if we are the best financial or the best professional fit for that client. And if not, it is really our duty to inform them of who may be a good professional fit. So I'll have you press on to the next slide here, Sasha. Perfect. So in speaking about empathy, one of the things that Sasha had touched on is really continuing to be a learner. Now, I want to take this to kind of a scientific approach here. One thing that you may hear from folks is that empathy is, they just have it. They're naturally empathetic. It's who they are. And that some people have it and some people that they don't. But interestingly enough, empathy is actually not a fixed quality. It is a skill, or better yet, as Sasha has described in some of her previous work, it is a muscle. And like any good muscle, it needs regular exercise to be strong and to be effective. So I want to take this kind of in three different areas. So let's start with the biological basis of empathy. Our brains are actually hardwired to connect with others. In fact, there's neuroscientific studies that have identified the role of what are known as mirror neurons, that are these specialized cells in our brain that activate when we observe somebody else experiencing emotion. Now, these neurons don't actually just observe, but they help us feel what others are going through. And beyond that, empathy is not just this biological reflex that we have, but it's also really crucial to our evolutionary function. So humans are always, seen as social creatures. We seek connection, we rely on cooperation, and really ultimately we need strong bonds that help us to survive. There's also the innate disposition that we hold, and the innate disposition actually starts to appear as early as infancy. So for instance, babies will cry when they hear another baby crying. It actually is an indicator showing really early capacity to resonate with others' emotion. So while we are certainly born with some differing levels of empathy, it is a skill that we can cultivate. But again, back to this being empathy as a muscle, it can atrophy without the correct practice and experience. All right, next, thank you. So the next piece that I want to talk about is kind of this learned or fixed piece. So back to the brain, which is incredible. It's fascinating. The brain's capacity to adapt is actually known as neuroplasticity. So this really supports the idea that empathetic skills can grow over time. And there's been a few areas that have been studied to help show this progress. So practices like mindfulness, meditation, even perspective taking have been shown to strengthen regions of the brain associated with empathy. There are programs that have been designed to reduce biases, such as diversity and inclusion workshops, that have also demonstrating that teaching people to step into somebody else's shoes, as Sasha had mentioned, can increase empathetic understanding. And furthermore, there are studies in the medical and counseling professions that have shown that empathy trainings, more specifically, such as role playing or active listening exercises, coupled with some mindfulness practices, significantly increase empathetic behaviors and attitudes. So it's incredibly important that we continue to foster that education within ourselves. If you're looking for some additional resources, we have some listed here. First, we have money scripts, which you may be familiar with. There is the financial genogram. If you're less familiar with a genogram, think of this as your financial family tree. When you go through a financial genogram, we often recommend that you start 2 generations prior to yourself or to that client that you're helping with, and ask them to look at this not only just from a family tree perspective, but to identify if somebody was educated, their job, to think about the relationships, not only in the fact that were they married or partnered or single, etc., but also how were they talking about money? Was it contentious? Was it conflictual? Was it something that was open and transparent inside of that family? What we can see is those behaviors actually start to go to transfer generationally, some of which may have been maintained or others of which have been something that somebody along the way decided, I don't like the way that we're doing things inside of this family and I want to change it. So financial genograms put it in a more holistic picture for us to understand, and not only looking at past generations, but also looking at what are we pushing forward to future generations? What are some of those behaviors and teachings? In addition to that, we've talked about some of the biases that we all hold, and so it's important to continue to create awareness of those. There is the implicit association test, which was, I believe, developed by Harvard. So if you search for implicit association test or the IAT, this is a really quick, there's several different topics I should note. And this is essentially a quick reaction, which helps to identify biases. And again, it is meant to be educational for you to build your own awareness. We also have the questionnaire of cognitive and affective empathy to help us better understand the cognitive empathy that Sasha was speaking to earlier. All right. Sasha had mentioned a pretty famous researcher known as Brené Brown, and I love the quote that we have here, especially when we are speaking to empathy, an area that she certainly is an expert in. When we need to dispel the myth that empathy is walking in someone else's shoes. Rather than walking in your shoes, I need to learn how to listen to your story, to listen to the story that you tell about what it's like in your shoes and believe you even when it doesn't match my experience. This is incredibly powerful. We talk about the experience of walking in somebody else's shoes, to identify those feelings, to identify, of course, the situation that is surrounding them. But what I believe is really important about this is to believe somebody, even when it doesn't match our own experience. I have the experience of being Emily Koochel. It will always be the lens in which I see the world. And I use that to make sense of the world around me. It's how we're hardwired. However, just because an experience looks different, especially if we have all polar plunged or cold plunged, as Sasha had talked about, and sometimes we take those mental shortcuts of, yeah, I've been there. Yeah, I understand. You can do it too. It's really important that we take time to offer the opportunity to really hear them and to believe them and to believe their experiences that have brought them here today. So a lot of it goes back to continuing to do the work as financial professionals to really best serve our clients.
I was like, I'm going to pop back up on the screen. I just want to talk quickly about the questionnaire of cognitive and affective empathy. So another way that widely researched, we talk about it, oh no, my internet, is about affective empathy, or we call emotional empathy. So it is a scale of 31 questions. I'm hoping you all can hear me still. Yes, okay, good. Of 31 questions, and it's broken up, and again, to that emotional empathy or the cognitive empathy. And so just like with emotional intelligence, where you kind of like take a skill, like you take a skill set, or you take a quiz and you figure out where do you have a deficit. This can be one of those pieces too, to say like, okay, do I have more cognitive empathy? Do I take more perspective taking? Or am I more emotional? So that is a questionnaire that you can take online. I was like, you just Google it real quick, you'll find it. But it can be helpful, especially if you feel like you're struggling with that cognitive empathy piece. I'm an emotional empathy person. Like if you were like, who feels empathy? It's me all day, every day. So having to be able to step back and be able to take some perspective and not feel the emotions that, whether it's Emily or whoever it may be in my life, feeling their feelings, because I'm one of those people who get fired up really quickly. So I just wanted to throw here today. As we kind of like that's presented by eMoney, and where we feature insights from financial advisor success designed to help you take your financial planning practice to the next level. So in each episode, we invite financial professionals to discuss what's at the heart of it all, which we call the advisor-client relationship, which is transactional yet deeply personal. So you can find that podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon Music, or wherever you get your podcasts. But if you didn't like my voice today, you're not going to like it on the podcast. So just so that you all know. And I would also tell you all to connect with us. If you thought this was a really engaging presentation, or maybe you were challenged today, we'd love to connect with you, and we can do that on LinkedIn. So we'll kind of switch over to questions and see if y'all have any questions.
Thank you.
Or give it back to Rachel, sorry.
Thank you so much, Emily and Sasha. This was an amazing webinar. I learned so much relevant information to not just my professional life, but also my personal life. Be aware of judgment, broaden your experience, listen to a story and believe it, even though it doesn't match my experience. All such great advice. So thank you so much. We'd love to turn it to some questions. So please put your questions in the Q&A box and I'll start running through them. So it would be helpful to know, as a pro bono planner, would be helpful to know techniques to prevent burnout with some challenging and difficult conversations, i.e. not to take on their emotional trauma. One way I do this is diversify the types of clients I take on to help prevent burnout. Do you have any other suggestions?
I'll start, Emily, if that's okay, and then I'll let you jump in. So just kind of like we talked about, learning a little bit more about the different facets of empathy, and knowing when you might be emotionally flooded or have those emotions come up. I think that's a really important thing to be aware of. I think it's really great that you try to diversify your clients, but I'll also hand over to Emily to see what she has to say.
Yeah, it's a great question because there certainly can be some of that transference in the conversations that we have with clients, some that are more emotive for us, some that we're taking on, especially if we're more empathetic people, maybe we feel that empathy really, really deeply. It's important to have time to decompress some of that. It's important to have time to process that. Also, if you find that specific situations are more emotive or perhaps bringing on more of that real empathy for you, and you're finding it hard to bring that back down or settle that back down, similar to what you mentioned is diversifying some of those, or perhaps making sure, at a single time, the services or the clients that I'm seeing, if I know that these are maybe more emotive and this is heavier for me, perhaps I kind of look at balancing my book or the services that I'm providing. Also, to ourselves, that if we find it that we are no longer able to kind of disengage that, and we really are taking it home, or we start to see that inside of our personal lives, and certainly we're all guilty of this, but to the point that it becomes impactful, that we also too can always benefit from seeing and talking to the right professional and making sure that the way that we're treating ourselves and providing these services is also taking care of our own mental and professional health.
Is empathy different or more challenging for people who are autistic or neurodivergent?
I'm going to answer that in a few ways. So the first one is I don't actually really know. I identify on the neurodivergent spectrum. I have ADHD, so I'll just be transparent about that. And I feel like I have a higher threshold for empathy, if that makes sense. But that doesn't, this is just my experience. But there are wonderful researchers out there. Dr. Christine Hargrove is a person I would definitely follow if you don't follow on LinkedIn. She really throws the financial planning and financial therapy together with neurodivergency. And she can be the person who can actually answer that question and give you research-based. But I'll toss over to Emily.
I would agree. I would suggest following Dr. Christine Hargrove for more information around that. That is not an area that I would expertise, so I certainly don't want to misspeak.
Thank you. What was the name of the 2017 study reference for empathy? And the question, are you more empathetic if you've walked in someone else's shoes?
Yeah, hold on a second. I'm pulling it up. It's really tiny font. So it's harder to empathize with people if you've been in their shoes. And I pulled that reference actually from Harvard Business Review, but I actually have the research article on my desk as well. So, but it's an easier read from the Harvard Business Review and can really help you understand it in a more digestible way.
With more virtual tools used in financial planning, how can planners ensure that technology doesn't get in the way of an empathetic client experience?
It's a really great question. I'm gonna throw to Emily.
Yeah, so it's an interesting question because we certainly want to lean into the efficiencies that technology provides us. There's nothing wrong with doing that. And one of the ways that we do that is especially in some of our more mundane and day-to-day tasks where technology was built to make us certainly more efficient. However, in some of the research that we've done inside of eMoney, we actually went out and we asked consumers their preferences for a digital engagement versus a human engagement or some type of hybrid. Now, certainly we're continuing to see technology evolve and we're seeing client expectations and services that we provide evolve. But ultimately, the takeaway from that was that clients still have the expectation that I will still have some type of human interaction. So one of the things that we've been pointing out more recently is what are those situations or conversations that technology is maybe not appropriate to replace. And right now, as it stands today, I would personally say that some of these more empathetic or emotive conversations that really need the personal touch and human touch to them certainly should not be replaced at technology at this point. We're seeing a ton of advances, so who knows where we go from today. But we also see that too from the client expectation side. So not only the fact that, you know, you may have some inherent distrust around technology or AI or where we're moving forward, but it's also to best meet the client expectation. And the client expectation is that through some of these more emotionally challenging conversations, or those that may bring on more emotionally challenging conversations, they still want that human touch. And the reason for that being that it feels like I've got a partner in this. It's a collaborative planning engagement, and it's also an opportunity to help perhaps educate somebody right there. So building their confidence, building their trust in you, that's really the greater value of the professional relationship that we can offer to somebody beyond, you know, of course, the skills and strategies that we can perform. It's always that human touch that takes it a bit further.
And kind of related to that, what are some techniques for practicing active listening to ensure clients really feel heard and understood? And like, does body language or tone of voice play into that?
I would say yes. All those things kind of really, when we're talking about listening skills, like just being very mindful of really listening, I think is just like the first and foremost the thing that we have to do. Sometimes we get caught up in our own thoughts of,
Oh
no, is she frozen?
I know. I think we might have
how do I
lost
want to
Sasha.
respond to what they're saying? Oh no.
There she is.
I was like, I'll just let you take over. My internet is crazy.
No. I think we're both suffering from some internet fatigue over here. But she raises a really good point. Something that she was mentioning is, first and foremost, we all have an internal dialogue. And what we often do is when we notice something, because you've been serving clients, especially if you've been doing it for some time, there's situations that look similar. And so we often will take a shortcut of, I know this situation, I've experienced this, I've met with clients, maybe you have a very specific service. And so we tend to see that happen time and time again. And so the natural reaction is to take that shortcut. But to Sasha's point, active listening is to settle that internal dialogue. It is to be very present. It's also to find some of that uniqueness in their experiences. And when it comes to active listening, we have the in-person version, and we have what we're doing here today in a virtual session if you service clients in that way. The nonverbal is certainly a little bit harder in a digital environment. If we're speaking at it from a human to human interaction, it can be those nods, it can be the soft mm-hms, it can be that confirmation that I hear you, certainly. Body language of leaning in, making sure that they feel that you are present. We don't want to lean back. We don't want to have crossed arms, you know, that I'm cut off from you. In the virtual environment, it can be similar. It can be holding that eye contact. It can be doing a soft head nod. Oftentimes we like to have ourselves on mute because there can be a whole lot of distractions, but it's also important to keep some of that verbal just if you can inside of that. So getting some noise canceling if that's appropriate for you, also leaning in as much as you can. The other one that's really tough in a virtual environment, and we're much better when we're in person, is to move the distractions. I can multitask, or at least I feel like I can multitask, but here's the deal. If I was doing that right now, you would notice it and you would feel it. And so if you're doing that in a client communication or a client interaction, they feel it and they notice it too. So reserve some of that if you can and set that aside. Those are a couple of quick ones. The last one, this is one of my favorites, is the clarification. If somebody says something to you, respond to it and say, if I heard you correctly, or, you know, I'm going to write this down, whatever your methodology is on that. What I'm hearing is you say X, Y, and Z. The most important part of this is the client's opportunity to confirm or to edit that response. So if they confirm, that means I interpreted it correctly and the communication was delivered in that way. If they edit it, great. Now I know what they meant to say, and we're both moving forward with the correct information.
Wonderful. I think that's all the time we have for questions. Again, thank you so much for this extremely relevant and interesting webinar. I learned so much that I can use in so many different situations. Just want to share a reminder that the Foundation for Financial Planning will report CE credit for CFP professionals to the CFP board. For the AFCs in the audience, please use the code FFP14 to report to AFCPE. I also put that code in the chat in case you didn't understand me saying it, FFP14. But remember, if you're a CFP professional, we will report your CE credit for you. Thank you again, Emily and Sasha. We really appreciate you being here and look forward to learning more about this topic in the future. We'll also send out slides and a recording later this week.
Awesome.
Thank you,
Thank you, Rachel,
everyone.
for having us. Yep.
Thank you so much.